Welcome to Healthcare IT Today. I'm John Lynn, together with my colleague and friend Colin Hung. The world of technology and healthcare ever changing in new and novel ways, and that's why we love this stuff. So join us as we discuss the latest healthcare and health IT news, meshed together in new ways which help generate ideas and new perspectives. Plus, we'll have a little fun along the way. Today, we're going to be talking about the new enforcement of information blocking. And be sure to follow the show on social media at the hashtag HITSM and our personal accounts at TechEye and at Colin_Hung. Plus, check out our 19 years of health IT content at healthcareittoday.com. Have you ever been blocked of your information, Colin, when you wanted
I've
your patient in?
I've only ever requested my information a few times and I was not blocked
Oh,
either
really?
time. So I've been pretty lucky, I think.
I would say it's been hard to access my information and I gave up. Is that information blocking? I don't know. That's
I think it would depend. I think the technically it would depend on why you gave up. But
yeah.
maybe, hey, before we dive into this, maybe for the benefit of people who are not familiar, like, can you just talk about this in general? A, what is information blocking? And B, what is this new enforcement announcement that came out that we're talking about, John?
Yeah, so I mean, it's somewhat complicated, because it gets into all sorts of legal weeds of what is information blocking. In fact, there's multiple cases on this as well: RTMS versus Point Click Care, Intus Care versus RTZ, CureIS versus Epic. So watch those cases. Then we'll actually have a law that says what is information blocking, what's considered it, what is it. But at the end of the day, what it really is about is that, hey, if you should be able to share that information with a patient per HIPAA, per some other law, state privacy laws, et cetera, that allows you to does that or even requires the disclosure of that information, then if you block access to that information, then that's information blocking. And I'll credit Brendan Keeler for giving me that definition today, because I was like, wait a minute, where does this all fit? And so anyway, he gave me that definition, which makes sense, right? Basically, if you have the right to access it, they should give you access to that information in some form or fashion. So you do it. That there are certain elements where it needs to be done electronically. There's some laws that require that. So, but not all laws are that way, depending on how it's stated. But yeah, so that's essentially information blocking. What's interesting is that we've probably had 2 or 3 layers of people saying, you better stop information blocking. I mean, even Mickey Tripathy was like, we're going to enforce it. Like, so we've kind of heard this before, but this one feels a little bit like it has more teeth to it. And if we were having this conversation 2 months ago, we're like, well, you're not allowed to information block, which is a risk legally, but are they going to really do anything about it? Like, you're going to get reported, but then what? Nothing's been done. We've had 1,500 people, patients, businesses, et cetera, report information blocking, and what's been done about it. Well, now what we're hearing, and this is interesting, because it came from CMS, OCR, and ONC. So multi-agency enforcement of information blocking. If someone's done as information blocker, they outline 3 ways that they can penalize them, at least for now. One is that there's disincentives within CMS programs, which means you're not doing the, was originally meaningful use, which I think is now called data sharing. I forget, interoperability. Anyway, whatever it's called now. And anyway, there's a number of programs, and there's disincentives that they can, which are essentially penalties on you. If you're blocking, you're not going to get access to those incentives, and you're going to have disincentives for your CMS reimbursement. The next one that's really interesting is that if you're an HIT developer, a certified health IT site, or an HIE, some sort of health information exchange, you actually could have up to $1 million per violation of information blocking. That's the one with the most teeth, right? That's pretty damaging and is problematic. Although the third one is very damaging as well, and that is you could lose your EHR certification. And we went through this during the meaningful use days, where one organization screwed up their certification, and that was a big problem for them, because customers can't get the CMS reimbursement if they're not using a certified EHR. If your EHR now is not certified, that's going to be a problem for you and your customers. How that plays out, how they reconcile that for providers that are on that, is problematic as well. But anyway, those seem like, at least from my understanding, the 3 areas that they're trying to add some teeth to the enforcement of information blocking.
Well, thank you for that explanation. So the next natural question would be, do you think this is going to work? Like, what's your reaction to this announcement on all of those agencies finally cracking down on health data blocking?
Well, I would say this, that uh it's dramatically better than we were a week ago. So like there is some fear in the hearts of people like, hey, I better make sure I'm giving access to them, right? And I think as part of this there will be like good faith effort, right? Like if you've made a good faith effort to try to not information block, and if you had a reasonable rationale for why you chose not to share that information, I have a feeling enforcement's going to be uh, kind to those people, similar to HIPAA violations, right? If you are deliberately allowing patient data to be breached and you knew about it and you didn't care, then you get really big fines. If you have something happen and you tried really hard to stop it and you can show that you mitigated it, then the fines aren't nearly as bad, right? And so I think we're going to see the same kind of enforcement here where it's like, hey, if you blocked because of some nuance of legality, you're probably going to be okay. But if you're doing it dramatically with a lot of people, then that can be very problematic for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I would agree with you. I think this was one of those cases where, the rules were made, but there was not really a lot of comment, unlike the breach side, but there wasn't a lot of teeth behind it for a long time. There was this sort of, well, let's wait and see what they're going to do and see if they're actually going to enforce it. Are they really serious about these penalties and fines? And up until that announcement, I think you could say waiting was probably a pretty good strategy, right? Because you just didn't know if they were going to enforce it or not. So kudos to these agencies for coming out and saying, "Oh no, 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 we are serious about this, and we are going to start looking at it." Now, the question is when and how many resources, but they certainly, put up a good front. Um, and I think that, to your point, I think that will have the right um, momentum. Meaning, I think people who are like, okay, waiting maybe on the sidelines a little bit will now take it a little bit more seriously and maybe make the effort to say, okay, let's just make sure that we're not info blocking, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, and let's
But
make
will they
sure
go
that,
after those 1,500? I don't know. That's going to be interesting. I mean, that's where I'd start if I were them, right? Like
right,
let's go through them and see who's there. It is interesting to see though, like, okay, where are they going to start? What are they going to go after? That's going to be interesting. If it's one patient that was blocked, are they going to use that? They probably will. They'll probably do one or two patients that were blocked to just send the message that says, don't block patients.
right. Right. And I think that's the case. I think, well, hopefully, to your point, they've already got reports that were made through the right system. That would be a great place to kind of dig through and do some preliminary analysis to pull out a few that maybe, unfortunately, for whoever the organizations are, maybe make an example of it, to at least show the world, hey, we are serious. Now the
Mhm.
fines may not, to your point, maybe they're not going to be $1 million maybe up front because maybe there was good faith efforts to avoid this. It just so happened that this this occurred. But I think showing that would back up the announcement, right? That hey, they are looking at it. We found a couple of cases. We're now investigating. Even that announcement, we're just investigating these particular ones. I think would show to the interested parties that okay, guys, we are really serious about this and caused the industry to maybe change, right, and put some focus on here.
It'll
But
be interesting to see if we get a lot more reports. Because before you're like, well, why should I report? They're not going to do anything. Like it's almost like, is it worth my effort? Now you're like, oh, they could get penalized. Maybe I should report. And maybe that will spike the number of people applying. The challenge is what you said though, briefly. You're like, do they have the resources to enforce this? I mean, OCR doesn't even have the resources to enforce HIPAA and the HIPAA
right,
violations. So like where is the money going to come from to enforce all of this? I think on the EHR certification side and even CMS with the disincentives, they probably do have some resources to do it. The EHR certification, I think there's 300 certified EHR. So we're not talking about millions, right? Like,
right.
so, it'll be interesting to see though, do they have the resources to be able to deal with this?
But I think so. Leading on to that, though, is this question I have for you, John. Like, do you think it's actually going this enforcement, whether they do or don't, but just the fact that they've announced it publicly, do you think that this is going to have the intended consequence of of slowing down or stopping information blocking?
I think so. I mean, what's interesting is that there weren't a lot of bad faith actors. There was maybe some that blocked because of business reasons. And I think now it's going to make them question and say, you know what, those business reasons aren't quite as good as they were, especially compared to these fines. So that may open them up. I think it's going to be a slow process, though. It's probably going to take, a couple people getting caught in big situations to kind of say, hey, you know what, we need to change how we're thinking about it. And I think when you pair this with the lawsuits that are happening, that's going to be fascinating. Bringing up Brendan Keeler again, he's highlighted multiple times how the financial organizations have pulled all of their stuff back. They don't have information blocking. Like, we have a special rule called information blocking that we can use to say you need to share data with these people. And so like that's a really big arm to leverage that no one else has when it comes to data sharing. And I think we have it because it seems like it's the right thing to do for patients, that data is shared so they get the best care possible. Like, I think that's the core of the idea of information blocking, is like, healthcare is different. We need to share to ensure the health of the patient, and that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting, right? Because I think the way I understand it, the way the law is intended is for you and I as individuals to be able to say, share my data when I request it, share my data the way I want to do it. What gets more interesting and for me much more nuanced is when it's a systemic information blocking, when it's between two companies,
Yeah.
right? Where there's not there, yes, there are individuals involved, but it's not a person that's being blocked. It's another company who wants access to another organization's data, and there's a block that happened. That to me is a little bit of a harder sell to say, well, was this law really intended to either enable that or prevent that?
Mhm.
Right? Because, to argue one side, well, we don't know the intentions of this company. Why should we let them get to all this data, even though they claim to have the rights from the patient, right? Where's the onus sit on all this? So anyway, because, in some of the cases you mentioned, it's not an individual versus a company, it's not a company versus a company. So anyway, to my question, I think it will be effective at helping to bring attention to information blocking, and therefore, I think it will drive some better behavior, right?
Mhm.
Maybe cleaning up of some processes, cleaning up of some technology to make it so that it's very clear that they're not doing this on purpose, right? Um,
Yeah. The trouble in what you described is intent, right? Like,
yes.
and that's the really interesting legal one that will play out over this time, is like, what is your intent, and is that intent aligned with treatment use case? Is it aligned with other use cases that are legally allowed? And so, and to be fair on this, a lot of really smart people have a lot of different opinions about how it's going to go. So I think that's still a little bit TBD.
It is a lot TBD. And hey, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Healthcare IT Today with John Lynn and Colin Hung. Today, we are talking about enforcement of information blocking and data sharing in general in healthcare. So, this question I have for you, John, is sort of relevant to here. So, freeing the data is one thing, meaning giving you access to data. But is it the right data anyway that's being shared with patients under this umbrella of information sharing?
It's interesting to think about because there's so many perspectives on this. You have the patient side, which is, I should have rights to my data and I should have access to my data. Judy famously said, and I think she's walked it back a bit, but she's like, well, what are the patients going to do with the data if they had it all? They don't even know what to do with it. And to some degree, she's right. Like, most patients don't know what to do with their data. Of course, that's not a reason not to share, and that's very clear in the information blocking. Like, you have to share the data if the patient wants it, and what they do with it is their own business. It's not your business, right? So let them do that. So I think that's what's interesting, is this is playing out. Here's a few perspectives that I had. Here's some are these hot takes, I guess. Is that what they call it these days? The kids call it these days. First, I actually think a full longitudinal patient record is just impossible to ever do. So like I think it's actually a mistake for us to try to even achieve that. I mean, maybe that's, it reminds me of the signs on the, I don't know if you see that as you're driving. It says our goal this year is 0 deaths, right? Well, we know 0 deaths is unachievable. So there's going to be some, but like doing any goal less than that is like embarrassing. Like, oh, we're fine with 10 people dying, right? Like that just doesn't sound right. It's kind of the same with this. Like, well, are we okay with some people blocking some data? It's like, no, we're not. Like, you should share all of the data. But realistically, you're never going to have a full longitudinal record. Healthcare is too disparate. At least that's kind of my own personal view, my hot take, right? And then the second one is kind of related to Judy's comment, which is we need the systems that look at your individual patient data to get a lot smarter so that once I correlate that data, which I'm going to be able to get a lot more data from QHINs and from HIEs and from all sorts of other, data sharing organizations. And we see some of this. I just interviewed XCures that works with No2 and Clear to be able to do some really cool data sharing. Like they're almost there and they're going to have all of that data. But then what's cool about XCures is then they take that data and do something smart with it and make it actionable for the patient. That's actually the next frontier, which is if you have all that data, how do you make it actionable for a patient? That is the biggest challenge we have. It's not even getting the data, it's what do we do once we have it?
Yeah, I don't even know how to even start to answer this question. Is the right data being shared with patient? Because I think that's dependent on the receiver, the person making the request. Like if all I want is just to have my immunization records, right? And you give me the data dump of what you think is my longitudinal record, to your point, John, like I don't need half of this, right? So
Kind of bad. It's a bad
and
experience if you
it's a
just
bad
want.
experience, but even worse than that, what if the immunization is incomplete? Right. So I got part of it, but not all of it. Well, you haven't blocked me, but you really didn't give me what I needed. And so now what? There's no enforcement of, well, you gave me partially, but not everything I needed. So whose fault? Like there's nothing there. Right. So right to me is interesting because to me, to know what right information is shared or not is totally based on intent and what do you plan to do with that data. And I know, we've got a lot of standards out there, so I think there's another problem with that in terms of there's not a standardized format, even though we supposedly have a format, but the semantic information inside of those formats is completely different.
I was gonna say
How
we have
you,
PDF, it's a standardized.
oh, right, but exactly, but the classic example that our friends over at Clinical Architecture, Charlie always talks about is, well, how would you define severe? Like you got a field that says severity, and like how you define it and how I define it are totally different, right? So just having the field called severity helpful, but not so helpful in the way that we've used that field is not consistent. There's no standard definition for all this stuff. So I think to me, we're not even at the point of even arguing whether or not the right information is shared because let's just start with, can we even just get it? And then we can get to the second step of, okay, now let's kind of hammer it down into giving what people actually are asking for.
That's a good point. Like, I was going to complain about standards for a minute here, and like how useless CCD is, like, or CCDA or whatever it's called. Like, that it's like, but here's the reality. Like, let's just share all the data and, let the smart people. And actually, I think that might be the answer. The AI is the smart people. The AI agents, let them figure out what to do with it, right? Like, it almost doesn't matter what format at some point. It's like, just give it to me in any format. Let me, give me as much as I can. And then let's use AI to solve some of that other problem. But yeah, I think it's a little more complex than that. But I think we're going to get to that day where it's like, yeah, give it to me in a variety of formats, and the AI and technology, and machine learning, et cetera, is going to be able to go through it and define what that data is and help you understand it.
So a more specific question then, John, do you think health IT vendors who want to have access to this kind of information, do you think that they have access to the right patient information?
I think the answer is clearly no. And all you have to do is ask any health IT vendor, and they'll walk a fine line. They will walk a really fine line because they know that the EHR vendor is their partner. and they need the data that they are getting right now. So most of them won't come out and be really strong because they don't want to piss off all the EHR vendors who they need to have a relationship with. But when you talk to them, they all say, I can't have access to XYZ. Whether that's something in the AI medical scribe space trying to document something or do orders or do prescriptions or reconcile, whatever, right? The allergies, medications, etc., right? Family history. Like they don't have access to all of those things to be able to do that in a way across every system to be able to do it. Same thing applies for digital front door. Can I schedule an appointment? Can I see what appointments are free? Can I see what doctors are doing what, et cetera, right? Like that information is not available to them. Question is that information blocking? It'll be interesting to see, right? Like, and then to extend it the point one more, I mean, there's literally companies scraping the data, using bots to scrape the data because they aren't available through API. Well, that's another interesting case that we'll go through. We'll see where it ends up. Is scraping allowed or is it not, right? And if scraping's allowed, or is that considered information blocking? I think it's going to be interesting to see it play out.
Yeah, and you just hit on some of the nuance that I think will be very interesting to track over the next little while, right? So if I have a system, for example, that can only send information on patients in a batch mode, like in a giant file that you have to go to I'm just going to make this up, an FTP site, you have to go, a secure FTP site that you have to go log into and download. Well, is that blocking or not? If I'm
Yeah,
trying to, right? Because if I'm trying
because
to,
it's available.
it's
It's in a
available and
sucky format, but
yeah, and it's sure it's not like quick. And so as a patient, I go, okay, well, that's the equivalent of you faxing me everything. I hate it, but at least you gave it to me, right? But as an IT vendor, if I need real-time access in order for my system to function, and your system isn't capable of that, well, is that blocking or not? I think that'll be interesting to see whether people interpret, well, your just technology is just old, but it's not blocked. You can do it. It's just this really circuitous way. Going back to your point of, well, the only way to then do it would be scraping it, right? Because you don't have this capability. So it gets interesting there in terms of the nuance of what block, really means. Like in that case, I don't know how they would interpret that. But
yeah,
but but to me, again, the one thing that I will sort of agree with Judy on and Epic on is I mixed in all of this is no discussion around intent, right? Like to me, this is and a little bit of like who has the legal duty to determine whether or not the request being made and the access to that data is valid, right?
mm-hmm.
Like I get it when it's an individual patient, you can go, well, are you the right person, right? Is this the same, are you the patient that you're asking about? That's easier. But when an organization like another company comes and said, I have the right to access this data, or I should be able to access this data because I've got the signed, EULAs from all these patients that have signed up for my app, right? That should be able to access this information. I think this has been brought up before. Like, how do they know? Right? How do you
Yeah,
know? And if they don't, do they get hit with this blocking only to find out few years later that that company had nefarious reasons, or maybe not so great reasons to use that data? That is a bit of a totally different gray area, right? And so are we creating a different problem by making it much easier to get access to the data, which I think was what some of the detractors of this free sharing, universal sharing, where there's no checks and balances in place was against.
yeah, which is problematic, right? I mean, do I want my data shared with tort something for a lawyer to get access to it? That seems clearly not what the intent of patient access was all about, right? Unless I go to that lawyer and then do it, right? That's a different thing, like you said. They have that agreement from the patient, but that's anyway, like you said, it's tough to know what's the intent of the request that's coming in, and then to complicate that even more, you have organizations who may be 90% totally clear intent wise what it is and 10% not. And it's like, okay, so now we're not just saying, are you a bad actor? but we're saying, is that a bad action? So
Right.
you might have a lot of really good, totally clear, reasonable requests for that information and to be able to use it, and then a bunch that aren't. And it's like, how do we filter through that? And who's the judge and arbiter of that? That's troubling and challenging in so many ways that it's scary, right? Because if we were all just honest, we wouldn't have to worry about that. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people who will push the edge, and some that will be just straight up dishonest. So,
Well, and again, this is a facetious example. I don't know if this is real or not, but imagine an organization like Peloton. I'm not singling them out because I don't think they do this, but they could make a reasonable request to say, listen, I want to get access to my users' health information because I have a tool that I've added to my system that if you have certain heart conditions, then I will alter the program, right?
sure,
Because I don't want to harm you. You look at that and go, that's actually a pretty good reason.
seems reasonable.
But Peloton or companies that make these they are not covered entities, right? So once they have the data, what happens after that? Right? Like,
That's a good
so,
question.
so you look at that and go, well, the intent is correct. It's a reputable company, but what happens when they get hacked? Right? What happens? You're not covered under these other rules. So I'm just bringing that up as an example of, to your point, you could have 90% good intent, but is that action really wise? And if you make it totally free flowing, then like these things can happen, maybe even inadvertently.
But I think most people would respond to that and say, well, that's my responsibility as a patient. But you're raising a good question, which is, how much should we as health IT vendors, as actors that have your health data, how much should we protect you from making a bad decision that's going to hurt you?
Right.
And I think most people would say, hey, that's on me. And I need to know that Peloton's going to take good care of mine. And if they don't, then I should hold them accountable and things like that. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see that. That is a really good question. Like, what is our responsibility to the patients who gave us that data and wanted us to protect it? That becomes problematic. The other problematic thing for this is we have a lot of read right now. You can read data, you can pull in data. There's not a lot of write. And I'm interested to see, like, I don't think that's really covered in information blocking, although it's in some APIs, right? Like there's some APIs and certification and things, that is there. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because reading is one thing and it's valuable and we need that for a lot of use cases, but writing is even more valuable. So how does that part of the information sharing, writing back to organizations, how is that going to play out?
Yeah. And that, that may be coming, right? One day down the road, is to say it's got to be rewrite and not just read. But
I mean, it's
I get,
coming for the scribes. The scribes need to write. Like,
yeah.
if they can't write, they don't have much.
But as they say, you have to start somewhere. But unfortunately for us, we're at the end of another episode, John. So we'll have to discuss this on another podcast. But thanks to all of you who tuned into this episode of Healthcare IT Today. You can find more details about our show by checking out the programs page on healthcarenowradio.com. And please share your voice and engage with the community at healthcareittoday.com and on social media using the hashtag HITSM. I'm Colin Hung, along with my friend and health IT collaborator, John Lynn. Thanks for listening and have a great week.